Well, without the staff, you have no organization. I mean, that's the definition of what an organization is. It's a collective group of people who are making something happen. So the most important resource in our field is the people. It's more what doesn't happen that is the benefit. You don't have gaps in continuity. I think you do need some turnover. I think when you get organizations where there's no turnover, they can become stagnant. But you have a workplace in which people feel generally positive about what they're doing. You have peaks and troughs in the work. Sometimes people are working incredibly hard. Other times there's a little capacity and a little slack in the system. I think generally where people feel that their ideas are heard, that they're respected as individuals, and that they're working for the greater good. I mean, there's a huge demand in younger people today for work that has meaning, and that can only be a good thing. This is the toughest thing that a leader does. Culture eats strategy every time. We have a lot of our professors who will teach that, but culture is the strongest, invisible, immovable force within an organization. There are only a few ways that you can do it. You can do it as a war of attrition. You make a stated announcement that you're going to change the culture, and then gradually the people who don't buy in leave or are encouraged to leave. That takes a long time. It's slow. It can be brutal. You can smash the culture by saying, right, the way that we used to work is not the way we're going to work. You're on board, you're not on board. If you're on board, hey, raise your hand, and if you're not, there's the exit. That's, again, a tough way of doing it. I think what's really difficult for people to accept, and this is my point of view, so there'll be people who disagree with me, they'll be wrong, but they'll disagree with me, is that trying to change a culture too incrementally is like pushing water up a hill. You don't want to smash a culture just for the sake of it. You don't want to, if you have nothing to remake it into. But if you have a culture of people being secretive or apathy or I'm only going to do work to a certain standard, it's really hard to change those things incrementally because the people who buy into the new kind of culture of enthusiasm or excitement or curiosity or whatever are going to be outliers. And at the end of the day, we're all still human beings, and our tribal instincts are very, very strong. So you need enough people who buy into what you're doing. You need to identify within the internal network of your organization who are the people that I need to sell them on what I'm doing and get them on board. And it's not just going to be department heads. It's quite often going to be people who are in less powerful positions. And you need to tell the story. You need to have a way of telling the story every day to everybody over and over and over again until they can tell the story to other people. Here's where we're going, and here's why we're changing, and here's what it's going to be like when we get to the promised land. Well, the first thing is not to work too many hours. And I went to a TED Talk in Edinburgh last year, and there was an amazing woman there who talked about the 5 most common deathbed wishes, and she'd surveyed thousands and thousands and thousands of them. And either number 1 or 2 on the list was, I wish I hadn't worked so hard. So we should maybe listen to that. That's not to say that people should slack off, and in under-resourced organizations, you're quite often called on to work more hours than perhaps are consistently reasonable. But you need to make a space for life as well. You need to have time that you invest in yourself. So if you're in a culture where your boss thinks it's appropriate for your life not to have any boundaries, where it's entirely appropriate for you to be contactable, let's say on a Sunday night at 11 o'clock at night, and he or she expects an answer to an email within 30 seconds, unless you're a cardiac care nurse, I think that's inappropriate, frankly. Unless you're on duty at 11 o'clock at night on a Sunday. So you have to have appropriate boundaries, and that can be hard. That can be difficult to do. The second thing is, do you like your work? Is there meaning in your work? Because if there isn't, you shouldn't be doing it. Most of the people that I know who work in the arts are very talented people who kind of carry their houses on their backs, and actually, you just must not spend 40 years doing something you don't like. And then thirdly is to just kind of have a sense of humor about it. Sometimes we take things so seriously. And there'll be many people who would say that I err far too much in the other direction. But, there are a lot of things that in the moment that they happen feel so intense and so all important. And I think a little bit of dispassion and a little bit of distance from things is a very good skill for a young person to cultivate. So don't work as long, don't care about your job. I'm sure this is good advice that all the bosses out there will be grateful that I'm giving. You can start a revolution without that many soldiers, and you can let a lot of light in a pretty small crack in a wall. But I think you have to think about the political realities of what you're doing. If a situation is such that there's no indication that the leader has any intention of either changing or moving on, probably your best bet is to go and find a better job somewhere or be working in a different organization. If you are so committed to the nature of the work that's being done, and it is relatively unique within the city that you want to live in, or whatever, then you have to sit down and have an honest conversation with yourself. Where is the level of compromise at which I feel that I'm being a realistic and pragmatic person, and where is the level of compromise where I don't respect myself? If there are things going on in the workplace that are dehumanizing or bullying or illegal or any kind of behavior that makes you feel morally suspect in some way, well, obviously you need not to be engaged in that. But if it's just that you simply don't agree with the direction the organization's going in, well, maybe you need to find some ways of getting more information about what direction the organization is going in. I've been incredibly lucky in my career. And one of the luckiest things that ever happened to me is that when I was in my late 20s, early 30s, I was a director at the English National Opera, a department head, and was the youngest department head at that time, one, I think, of only 2 women. And I had so many internal conversations about, well, if I were running this company, I certainly would not be doing it that way. And kind of like what Mark Twain said about it's amazing how much more intelligent our parents get as we get older. 10, 12 years later, I was running that company. And there was a degree of understanding that I had about why certain decisions have been made. But there were also some things that I thought, no, that's not right. And we're going to change that. So I was really lucky because I got a chance to test my own theories. People can be amazingly powerful if they are prepared to contribute to the greater good of an organization. Wherever you are in the organization, you can be incredibly powerful if you are making a real contribution to it. And I think sometimes, particularly with younger people, we don't see it because power and authority are not always the same thing. It does happen, and I think there are some organizations where that is they become the farm team for people who've got more money. And the nonprofit sector tends to be sometimes the farm team, which is, you could say, a shame, but on the other hand, you can say our diaspora is very broad and infiltrating a great number of areas. If you are so under-resourced that you can't hire even the minimal talent to do the job that you want, then you don't have a human resource problem. You have a different kind of problem. And I have always believed you should pay people what they're worth, demand a lot of them, and get rid of them if they don't do the job. We establish a weird kind of emotional blackmail when we get very talented people to work for so much less than they're worth, where they are subsidizing their own jobs and they're taking on personal hardship. And then there's a kind of guilt equation there. Well, I can't ask this person to perform but so well in this job because this job is so underpaid. Should arts and cultural leaders be the most highly paid people in the land? No, not in the nonprofit sector. Should they be so underpaid that these younger people have to work 3 or 4 jobs to make a go of it? No, I don't think so. There's something about that doesn't feel right to me. How do you find great people? The first thing that you do is you have great jobs and you have a great place to work. That there's something about where you're working that draws good people, because word of mouth is where the best people are going to come from. Finding great people, that's the only thing you should focus on if you're the leader, until that's completely sorted out. And the minute you get it sorted out, something will happen, somebody will leave or something will change. That has to be the obsession, the preoccupation of the leader, is to make sure that the best people are doing the jobs that you need doing, that the organization needs doing. The second question was how to hold on to people.
How do you know you're hiring?
How you know you're hiring the right person? Well, there are lots of different ways that you can check for fit, in advance. I think the more, within reason, the more people within the organization that get to meet this person and form an opinion, the better that opinion will be, the better informed that opinion will be. I mean, it's horses for courses. You don't invite someone to come in for a $30,000 a year, receptionist interview and have them meet 80 people. You moved into a different zone there. It's not an interview, it's a hostage situation. So I think, but the more input that you can get, I think one should structure the sorts of questions that you want to ask so that they're not just to find out how people feel about what the organization does and how they feel about themselves as individuals, but to see what kind of imaginative leap are they making of, when I'm here, this is how I picture my contribution to the organization. And then lastly, you need a structure that allows for the fact that you're going to get it wrong sometimes. A kind, humane, effective, efficient structure that, says, we will have, 90 days for both parties, no harm, no foul. You have to acknowledge that sometimes you won't get it right. The clearer you can be about what success looks like in that job, and the more upfront you can be about that, the greater the chance that you're going to hire the right person, because the right person is going to be able to respond to those proposed metrics or those performance measures in a way that enthuses you about their chance of succeeding.